Pete Carroll and the Legion of Boom set NFL defenses back 10 years in terms of scheme development. This is a quote from Coach Vass, one of the most well-known X's and O's teachers across the internet. And you know what? He's right. As a Seahawks fan, I was at first affronted. What do you mean that the best defense of all time somehow set the league back? And I still do believe that the Legion of Boom is the greatest defense of all time. They almost shut out a historically great offense led by an all-time great quarterback in the Super Bowl. But today we're going to set the record straight, because right now the narrative is that this scheme got figured out. Offenses found solutions for the schemes that the Seahawks were running, and then the entire defense crumbled. In 2012, this defense allowed just 15.3 points per game. For reference, in 2024, the best team in the league in points allowed per game was only able to get it down to 17.7. And in 2013, the Seahawks were even better. They allowed just 14.4 points per game, and 2014 was much of the same, with just under 16 points per game. But fast forward 5 years, and the Seahawks defense was a far cry from their glory days. They surrendered 24.9 points per game in 2019. So what happened? Well, most would say that Pete Carroll couldn't adapt. His scheme got figured out and his defense fell apart. I've combed through a ton of Legion of Boom tape, and what I can conclude after watching all of it is I don't think that narrative is accurate. In today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into what this scheme was and how it worked. And most importantly, we'll answer the question, was this scheme even good to begin with? The Legion of Boom did not run a complicated scheme, nor was it a varied scheme. In 2016, which is the earliest year that we have data for this kind of stuff, the Legion of Boom was strikingly one-dimensional. 78% of their coverage snaps from that year were either cover 1 or cover 3. That was pretty much their defense. On early downs, the Seahawks would often play cover 3, as it does a great job of preventing explosive plays and stacking the box. On third down, the Seahawks would then switch to a heavy dose of cover 1, which allows them to play sticky man coverage and force tight window throws. We're going to go in depth into how this defense ran those coverages and what let them get away with emphasizing them as much as they did. Let's begin with cover 1. Cover 1 has always been a foundational coverage in the NFL, and that still hasn't changed today. The way that the Legion of Boom played their man coverage had been run decades before them and is still run in many of the same ways now a decade later. Let's look at this play from the Super Bowl, which is one of the most famous plays in Seahawks history. If you don't remember this play yet, you will once you see this hit. The Seahawks begin by presenting a 2-high structure. Quick clarification, when we're talking about 1-high or 2-high, we're talking about the number of safeties who are aligned in a pre-snap deep alignment. 1-high does not mean cover 1, 2-high does not mean cover 2. 2-high refers to the safety structure, not the coverage. We've already talked about how the Legion of Boom was based out of cover 1 and cover 3, and despite this 2-high alignment, that trend is not changing here. Yes, they begin by presenting this 2-high structure, but Cam Chancellor is rotating down, and this is cover 1 robber. From the Broncos, we have a version of shallow cross, and to me, this is actually excellent scheme. They know exactly what they're going to get from the Seahawks, and they're trying to attack this off corner. Here's where the ball is going to go on this shallow cross to Demaryius Thomas. Hopefully this play is starting to ring a bell. The Broncos are using 2 different picks to take care of the corner that needs to guard this route. The first one comes from this burst corner route from Wes Welker. Now, Wes Welker isn't really trying to win on this route. Winning on a corner route when the defender has outside leverage like he does here is simply not easy, and Wes Welker, who is a true slot receiver, he's not going to be able to do it. What he's actually trying to do is slow down Maxwell. He doesn't need to run into Maxwell, but Welker is creating traffic. More traffic comes from the other side. Julius Thomas is coming on this crosser and is again getting in the way of Byron Maxwell. If we pause it But right here, we can see that there is no way that Maxwell is going to be able to keep up with this shallow cross from Demaryius Thomas. Unfortunately for the Broncos, and most of all for Demaryius Thomas, Cam Chancellor knows exactly what is coming. The anticipation here is absurd. Cam sees exactly what is happening with this shallow cross concept, and he is triggering on the ball before Manning is even beginning his throwing motion. He takes a perfect angle and delivers a hit that belongs in the history books. For me, at least, this was the moment where the Seahawks sealed their victory. Sure, it was just 5 minutes into the game and they were only up by 5 points, but this play proved that the Broncos had no chance. They dialed up their best cover one beater, executed it well, and it didn't matter. Cam Chancellor was better than anything that they could come up with. So that is cover one. The Seahawks ran it at a tremendously high level thanks to Cam Chancellor being an elite robber over the middle of the field, and Earl Thomas being likewise elite as that free safety. The corners and the linebackers were also elite. I know that I'm overusing that word, but it really is true. Now, before we move on to cover three, I do want to show this play that highlights one of the nuances that the Seahawks used to be able to get away with running as much cover one as they did. This play comes from the Super Bowl, which will not be named, but it is a great play and it shows the excellent scheme that the Seahawks had to run their cover one. This is cover one lurk. It is man coverage across the board with Cam Chancellor as the free safety and one player in a low hole zone. But who takes that low hole zone is the interesting part of this coverage. Nick Saban calls this technique funnel, and although it is mostly used against a running back, here the Seahawks use a similar idea against Gronk. Both Bobby Wagner and Earl Thomas will be keen on Gronk, with B-Wags to the outside and Earl to the inside. After that, it's pretty simple. If Gronk goes to the inside, then Earl will take him in man coverage, and Wagner will take the zone in the low middle of the field. If Gronk were to cut out, then Wagner would match up against him, and Thomas would take that zone. These are some of the intricacies that don't get talked about much when you're discussing man coverage, but this is what makes the coverage function. It guarantees that you'll be able to guard Gronk with leverage. If Gronk could just square up a defender and break away from him, that would be almost impossible to guard. But here, no matter where Gronkowski goes, he'll be met with a defender who is waiting for him. As Gronk cuts to the inside, B-Wags gets his eyes back on the quarterback and he breaks on the ball to help with the incompletion. That is an excellent play from a Hall of Fame linebacker, but also some excellent scheme. The Legion of Boom ran cover one at a tremendously high level. It was one of their foundational coverages. But now let's talk about their signature coverage, the one they are really known for, which is of course cover three. Because if we're going to talk about the Legion of Boom, we need to do a deep dive into cover three. The 2002 Tampa Bay Buccaneers had their Tampa 2, and the 2013 Seahawks had cover three. Let's look at this play against the 49ers from the 2013 NFC Championship game. I think that you might remember this play as well. The first thing to point out about cover three is that it is a single high safety coverage. As you can see right here, the Seahawks are packed into the box with only Earl Thomas playing deep. Unlike the two high structures that dominate the league today, the Legion of Boom was focused mostly on one high structures and one high coverages. And the best thing about running a one high structure is the number of defenders that you can pack into the box. This gives the Seahawks a massive numbers advantage, and that's why they were excellent at stopping the run when they ran this scheme. Cover one and cover three are both traditionally played from a single high structure, and again, the Seahawks ran those coverages over 75% of the time. But back to this clip. Once the Niners run their play action, the Seahawks get back into their cover three. Let's really dig into what is happening here, starting with the free safety. Earl Thomas is aligned at 13 yards of depth right over the ball. He is the last line of defense for the Seahawks. Playing just 13 yards off the line of scrimmage is aggressive. At the NFL level, 15 yards is more of the norm, but he's Earl Thomas, so he gets away with it. In cover 3, his responsibility is to take everything deep and to the center of the field. Now let's look at these corners who are the other deep third defenders on this play. Byron Maxwell is playing with an off-bail technique. At the snap, he's about 5 yards off of the receiver, and he immediately bails, which means that he turns his back to the sideline and runs to stay deeper than the receiver. Again, he may be aligned only 5 yards off the ball, but he has a deep zone to that side and cannot be beat over the top. To the bottom of our screen, we have Richard Sherman playing his favorite technique, which is press bail. In press bail, you start from a press coverage alignment, but instead of trying to get your hands on the receiver and bump him off of the route, Sherman immediately bails and again is getting his back to the sideline to mirror the receiver. There are pros and cons to each technique and different reasons why you might want to be in press bail and why you might want to be in off bail, but at the end of the day, both corners are tasked with the same thing, to stay deeper than everything to their side. I do want to highlight one thing real quick about how Richard Sherman plays this, because this is important. He is matching the receiver on a dig route. He almost makes this look like man coverage. Now this is still truly zone coverage, but this is an example of some match principles being used by the Legion of Boom. Instead of just spot dropping to his zone, Sherman has some rules to match this receiver and abandon his zone to play man coverage if there's no more verticals to that side. This has been where the league has been trending, with a lot more zone match and man match coverages, and I just wanted to point out that there is a little bit of it with the Legion of Boom. We'll talk about that more later in the video. Now let's look at the underneath coverage defenders. The first pair of defenders are playing their curl flat zones. In this case, that is the will linebacker, KJ Wright, and the strong safety, Cam Chancellor. Their job is to drop to around the numbers and provide underneath support for the corners and be in a great position to rally and tackle on anything to the flat. Lastly, you have your inside hook defenders. They will also be dropping with zone eyes to protect against anything cutting behind them and be able to drive on anything underneath. That is the coverage and the basics of cover 3 zone. On this play, Kaepernick is trying to hit this 15-yard out route from Anquan Bolden, and this does admittedly look good on paper. The corner is going to be playing with a lot of cushion, and you should be able to hit this right underneath because that corner has the deep third zone. He has to stay over the top. Unfortunately, Cam Chancellor is the player who's playing the curl flat zone. Not only does he turn and drop quickly once he sees that there's no immediate threat to the flat, but he also shows off his playmaking skills and gets the interception. This defense got a lot of picks. But this scheme of spamming cover 3 as much as the Legion of Boom did, it's simply not a fundamentally sound way to play defense. Sure, it worked well for them. I'm not here denying the results, but let me show you another play from this legendary defense. This one comes against the Broncos the year after they met in the Super Bowl, and this is another Cam Chancellor interception. Here the Broncos are in a 3-by-1 formation, and the Seahawks respond with cover 3 Mabel. Cover 3 Mabel is a simple way to defend these 3-by-1 formations. Instead of just playing straight zone coverage across the field, cover 3 Mabel floods the numbers to the passing strength. They accomplish this by playing straight man coverage on the single receiver side. That means that Brandon Browner is locked on his receiver and KJ Wright is locked on the running back in man coverage. That allows the other side of the field to play cover 3 rules, with Bobby Wagner also turning towards the passing strength. Bobby Wagner is critical to the success of this coverage call. In this coverage, he is the 3 up is 3 player. What that means is that if the number 3 receiver goes vertical, it is his responsibility to carry that player up the field. Of course, that requires a tremendous amount of athleticism, but that's the kind of player that Bobby Wagner was. But the Broncos are ready for this. I think something that is often misunderstood is that cover 3 did not get figured out after the Legion of Boom took over the league. It was already figured out. The Legion of Boom did not invent cover 3, and they didn't reinvent cover 3. 3. They just ran it better than anyone before them or anyone since. This is a particularly nasty cover 3 beater. This is 4 verticals. The idea is that the Broncos know that the Seahawks only have 2 deep defenders on this side of the field, so they're just going to send too many guys. The number 3 is running straight up the seam to try to occupy the free safety, and the outside receiver is running off this outside corner. Once the number 2 clears the first line of defenders, he should be wide open. Attacking vertically like this destroys cover 3. This play from 2024 shows the Cardinals doing basically the same thing. Sure, there's some window dressing with the motion and the switch release, but at the core, they are attacking cover 3 up the seam. Once you clear the underneath defenders, this space is practically unguarded. The answers were there for the Broncos back in 2014. They knew what the Seahawks were going to be running, and they had all of their cover 3 beaters prepared. They have the right play call and an all-time great quarterback, so let's watch what happens. Manning is doing everything right. He is quickly getting this ball out with excellent anticipation because he knows that this pass rush is closing rapidly. He knows exactly where this ball is going pretty much before he even takes the snap. But so do Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor. We just went over why this was the perfect play call to bust this coverage, but the Seahawks secondary was still too good. Let's start with Earl. He is breaking on this ball before it is even released. He starts by mirroring the quarterback's drop, so since Manning is opening towards the field side, that is where he starts creeping. But he was already driving on this route before the ball came out. I'm sure part of that is his film steady and he knows the weaknesses of this coverage, but also at some point it's just Earl Thomas playing like the all-time great safety that he is. And just watch how quickly this guy is able to get there. It's not just the anticipation, but the range that Earl Thomas had is simply unbelievable. He was truly able to cover the entire middle of the field and was a critical piece for this defense. From the end zone angle, the speed is really shown. Earl Thomas is just a lightning strike coming out of the heavens, and even if this ball got to the receiver, I don't think that there's a chance that he catches it. And then we have Cam. He does a great job of watching the quarterback's eyes and gaining depth. When you draw this coverage up on the board, your hook defender is not really playing this deep, but this defense was all about playing fast and thriving off of the instincts of these coverage defenders. That is what Cam is doing right here. And also, I'm sorry, but human beings should not be able to jump this high. I think I just kind of forgot how unbelievable of an athlete Cam Chancellor was. No matter what the athletic testing says, Cam was a freak, and on this play he elevates and is able to snag the pass. So yes, another interception for the Legion of Boom. But the scheme here really got exposed. If you didn't have Earl Thomas there on the back end and you didn't have Cam Chancellor underneath, this would have been easy yardage. Catch the ball, throw it up the seam on 4 verts against cover 3, rinse and repeat. When Coach Vass talks about how the Legion of Boom set back defensive schemes in the NFL for a decade, he's talking about plays like this. Other NFL teams spent so much time trying to replicate this scheme when the scheme doesn't work without these elite players. And this problem with cover 3 is not new. In fact, Nick Saban and Bill Belichick invented cover 3 Rip Liz back in the 1990s when they were with the Cleveland Browns to solve this very problem. Rip Liz is more of a zone match way to play cover 3. We're not really going to get into that, but it's different than what the Seahawks ran, and they invented it to solve the problems that the Seahawks were facing in 2013. Here's Nick Saban speaking back in 2010 on the problems that he and Belichick faced when they tried to run cover 3 back in the 90s.
We couldn't play 3 deep zone, and this started at the Cleveland Browns when I was the defensive coordinator in the early 90s. Pittsburgh would run Seattle on us, 4 streaks.
I just want to jump back in here. That 4 streaks concept is practically the same as what we just watched the Broncos run. Sure, they ran it out of a different formation, but it was the same core idea with 4 verticals to overload the zones. The Broncos attacked the Legion of Boom in the exact same way that offenses attacked Nick Saban back in the 90s. All right, let's get back to what he said.
So we got to where we could not play 3 deep zone because we rerouted the seams and played zone, and played what I call country cover three. Everybody know what I mean? Drop to your spot, reroute the seams, break on the ball. Well, when Marino's throwing it, that on breaking on the ball shit don't work.
But that right there is what we're talking about today. The Seahawks did play a lot of country cover three, and they were a break on the ball defense. Of course, they didn't do this exclusively, and I think sometimes it's a little bit exaggerated how much they relied on true zone coverage, but they did use true zone cover three, and it worked for them. These quotes from Nick Saban came in July of 2010, just a few years after Nick Saban, of all people, said that spot drop cover three doesn't work. The Seahawks won a Super Bowl relying heavily on that coverage. So yes, Coach Vass is right. The NFL's obsession with trying to replicate this magical scheme when it was really never remarkable to begin with, that absolutely set back the development of NFL schemes. No other team in the league could run this with close to the success of the Legion of Boom. Yes, there were some teams who had successful defenses and ran similar systems. The 2015 Broncos and 2017 Jags come to mind, as well as many more, but none of them were the Legion of Boom. And even once the Seahawks started to lose their players, they just couldn't replace them. It wasn't like Pete Carroll lost his magical scheme or that it even got figured out. Quandre Diggs was a great safety, but he's no Earl Thomas. And this scheme needs an Earl Thomas. It needs a Richard Sherman. It needs a Cam Chancellor. It needs dominant coverage linebackers and a ferocious pass rush. This episode is not the bashing of Pete Carroll or the Legion of Boom. In fact, I think that this is a celebration of both of them. The coaches realized that they had a special defense on their hands and pretty much got out of the way and let them play fast. That is an excellent coaching job. The Seahawks coaches knew what they had and they deployed them in the best way possible. Isn't that the entire point of coaching? But the thing that just keeps jumping off the tape is how unbelievable all of these players were. No one was ever able to truly replicate this scheme because it is all about that elite talent and the specific skill sets that the Legion of Boom had. I've often seen Hawks fans talking about trying to create the next Legion of Boom, and I just want to say right now, that is not going to happen. I adore Mike Macdonald's defense, but he's not trying to build the next Legion of Boom. In fact, his defenses are almost the exact opposite of everything that the Legion of Boom stood for, in everything from his coverages to his personnel to the complexity of his system. I don't think that there will ever be a group that is as dominant as the Legion of Boom was. Everyone in the stadium knew what they were doing, and offenses consistently lacked answers. They played pure fundamental football at an incredibly high level. So let's remember the Legion of Boom for what they were, a true anomaly of defensive prowess, and I'm just glad that I got to experience that as a Seahawks fan. Thanks for watching, and go Hawks.